Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. Pressing subscribe and sharing it with family and friends really does help our series. Joining us today is Wendy Chadwick, a PhD researcher at the University of Hull, whose work tackles one of the biggest headaches in the net zero conversation, decarbonising the UK fishing fleet. Hello Wendy, welcome back to Seafood Matters.
Thank you for having me back on a podcast this morning.
Thank you for coming back. Today we're digging into a tough subject, decarbonising the UK fishing fleet. There's plenty of political noise about net zero, but what actually happens when you speak to the skippers who have to make these changes, pay for them, and somehow stay afloat at the same time? My guest here, as we said, is Wendy Chadwick, has spent a long time speaking directly to the fleet, and the reality she uncovers is a fair bit more complicated than the headlines. Let's get into the truth here. Wendy, from the outset, it looks like the fleet is split on decarbonisation. But when you dug deeper into the Q method results, the picture was so clear. What did you really find?
Okay, Jim. Yes, I spent the summer going to Northern Ireland, Southwest England, Northeast England, and Northeast Scotland, speaking to the members of the fishing fleet, whether that be small scale inshore to offshore, even companies as well, shellfish and whitefish catching sector. So I got a nice spread of information. Yes, I used something called the Q method. It's kind of like a more quantitative, it's a mixed methods, but it's a more quantitative. So that gave me statistical evidence. And then I also did individual interviews as well, where Q method wasn't suitable at the quayside, for example. My initial findings, preliminary findings, did find that there were two clear divergent viewpoints, one in favour and agreeing with decarbonising the UK fishing fleet, and one which was disagreeing, and very strongly disagreeing, actually. But when I dug a little bit deeper into those statistics, I found that half of the group, 4 out of 7 on one group, did not express an opinion on decarbonising the fleet. But because 2 members had very strongly agreed, it kind of skewed the data a little bit, making it look much more favourable towards decarbonising the fleet. So overall, the study would actually suggest that, or the evidence would suggest that the majority of the fleet that I spoke to do not agree with decarbonising the UK fishing fleet.
Not the opinion, just
No.
don't agree.
Overall, it's no longer an even split of agree disagree. It is heavily weighted towards disagreeing when I've dug deeper into the results. Now, there were areas where they did agree, and there were areas where they did strongly disagree with. In terms of strongly disagreeing, they actually, one group would absolutely not fund any technology for net zero, where the other one would. One would not invest in any new engine, even if it became available. The other group suggested that they would. One group suggested that there was much more important things going on in the fishing fleet and that decarbonising was not important. Where they did agree, they were both concerned, both groups were concerned about being asked to decarbonise and what that might look like. Even those that agreed, they were still concerned. They strongly agreed together that incentives would be imperative, that some parts of the fleet would be able to, particularly the small scale, and some parts would not. Maybe the larger scale would not be able to. And there was also concern that decarbonising could drive up quayside prices and operational costs, which could actually make the UK less competitive and more reliant on imports, which would not align.
So how much of the resistance would you say is genuine opposition, and how much is uncertainty or fear of costs?
I would say number one would be the uncertainty and the fear of what it's going to cost. Many felt that it was unaffordable. Who was going to pay for it? Where was the money going to come from? They didn't feel that the government had that kind of money, and it would be an incredibly expensive thing to be able to achieve. There was a little bit of resistance in terms of the older the skipper, the more likelihood that they may not want to make changes because they weren't going to be around and it wouldn't affect them. So there was a little bit of that came out as well. And there were some younger skippers in the fleet, and they were much more in tune with climate change, net zero, the environment, and they were far more willing to make those changes because they wanted to see their future in fishing, for decades to come. So they were willing to make those changes, whereas the older members may not have been so willing to do that.
What's your sort of view, Wendy, when you say climate change? Because we hear about the water warming, but I was talking to a fisherman yesterday who landed up this area in north of Scotland, in Scrabster, just Monday. He's a crabber. He hadn't such a good fishing this week, but his problem was the water was colder. What's your thoughts on that?
I suppose the further north we go, it's not as warm as in the south. The warming of the waters, they're definitely seeing the benefits and the opportunities in the southwest of England. They've had the octopus bloom over the summer when I was down there, so they've taken great advantages of that. I suppose the further north you go and up to Shetland, and we do have colder waters, so I think it's affecting the fleet differently in different parts of the country. There are opportunities for some and maybe not for others. But the southwest were definitely taking advantage of the warming of the waters coming up from the Mediterranean with the octopus bloom.
Yeah, this was a drop of about 3 degrees from just a previous trip. It wasn't historic.
Okay, just a kind of at that time. Yeah, I know they've been struggling. I know they've been struggling on the northeast around Bridlington with crabs and the quantities over this summer. So there are things that are changing and affecting the fleet in different ways by the look of it.
If only a small number of participants said they'd made changes specifically for net zero, the results were driven purely by fuel savings. What does that tell us about where the industry's head really is?
The industry constantly highlighted to me that they're struggling. There is a surplus of cash. Some skippers were going without wages. They've got wives and children and mortgages to pay. They were going without a salary to pay for crew and their increased fuel costs. So, but they at the same time quite a few of them were actually funding the changes to reduce emissions on the boat, to reduce those fuel costs. They were still finding that money to keep costs down and increase their profits. So that was really their focus of attention. They just didn't realise that essentially they were also reducing emissions in terms of a decarbonisation way, really. But there was this disconnect. Their focus was on reducing fuel costs and increasing profits, even if they were self-funding it as well, and some of them getting some grants for it. Yeah. So I think at the minute, they just want to go to sea to fish. They want to land their catch. They want to earn a living. That's the most important thing to them.
I can see that. I can understand that. So that are policymakers understanding the motivations of the fleet?
No, I'm not convinced that they are, Jim. I don't think policymakers are on the same wavelengths or on the same page as the fleet. I don't think that they're necessarily understanding the difficulties and the challenges that the fleet is undergoing at the moment. And I think that they need to better understand those issues within the fleet, most certainly before they make any decisions in terms of decarbonising the fleet.
Yeah. And when you mention ageing skippers and boats, you've hinted that the age of the fleet and the age of the skippers may be the biggest obstacle of all. Is that fair?
Yes, I think it is a fair statement to make there, Jim. Definitely. In terms of vessels, I highlight the Northern Ireland fleet. They're in a really difficult position, very challenging. They've got vessels that are kind of the old hand-me-downs from the northeast of Scotland, that then gone to the Clyde, then gone to Northern Ireland. A lot of them are old wooden vessels, 50 years old or more. And, they can't afford new vessels. And they feel if there was a decarbonisation programme that they would have to replace those vessels, which would cost an enormous amount of money. Although in the back of my mind, I still think, could we have a solution with an alternative fuel? Those vessels wouldn't be able to be retrofitted. So is alternative fuel the answer? Other vessels would say to me that good vessels, not old ones, that every inch on deck is taken up by something, and there isn't any space on board for additional technologies. And that keeps leading me towards, is alternative fuel the answer and the way forward? And when I put that forward to a load of fishermen and skippers, they weren't thinking about alternative fuel. They thought, we haven't thought about that. And they are a little bit hung up on electric won't work for my vessel, and it will not for many. But they weren't looking at the bigger picture and the alternatives beyond, electric battery won't work for me. So I think I think the skippers and the fishermen also need to start thinking outside the box a little bit and not getting drawn into just small technologies like electric.
Yeah, it's almost like they're caught in a time trap.
Mm-hmm.
They want to keep going with the old boat, but the realities are coming their way.
Mm-hmm. But then they have no choice but to keep going with their old boats because they've got no money for change. The lack of money was quite a problem, mentioned frequently throughout, and not just in Northern Ireland, also in the southwest of England, northeast Scotland. Maybe not so much in northeast Scotland. I think they're in a better place, but certainly on the English part of the English fleets, it was mentioned quite a bit. I think Scotland's particularly ahead of the game. They've got the big pelagic vessels and they've got the money that's being spent and has been spent. I didn't see that anywhere else, but Scotland seems to be in a different league.
Well, there's certainly a more modern fleet maybe of bigger vessels.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about a lack of confidence and a lack of understanding of technologies that already exists. Whose job is it to fix that gap?
That's a difficult one, Jim. There is a lot of good work going on in the background by companies, fishing groups, trying to spread the word of what technologies that we have out there already. Do the fleet know about them? They would appear not to know about the existing technologies that we've got. I also think that those that do know and are engaging with the technologies are the same fishermen who go to all of the groups, the Fishing Innovation Sustainability, the Fishing into the Future. And we're just scraping the surface with those people that are going to those groups. They're very small in the minority, and we've got a very large fleet. I think the best thing that the fleet could do would be to talk to each other and to be telling each other what they've got and what they're doing. I was aware in the southwest of England of one vessel owner and skipper who had some really good technology on his vessel, but nobody else knew that he had it. And he was the only one in that part of the fleet, but nobody else knew that he had those on board his vessel. It's almost like they all do their own individual things, but they're not talking to each other. So if I was to say one thing that would be helpful and to raise confidence, it would be for the skippers and the fishermen who have already tried technologies that exist and that work to start spreading the word amongst themselves. And that would then probably they would gain confidence, and there'd be more people willing to try new technologies and go and do it. So I think the fishermen have got a role to play here as well, and not just everyone else around them.
That's a great point. I think it's the 3-letter response, joined up thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's start talking
Yeah.
on that quayside, around the docks, around the ports, because they're not doing that. They're going out to fish, they're coming in, and they're going home. They're just doing their own business, and they're not coming together as a fleet. And I think that would be helpful if they did that.
Be interesting to find a way of getting that message out. I dare say when you're talking to them, you're probably reminding them that they need to do that.
Yes, I mean, I was approached by one skipper in Bridlington, no, Whitby, it was Whitby, and he wanted to go hybrid, and he was a small vessel. He said, I'm not doing it to save fuel because my fuel is minimal already. What I want to do is go hybrid and share it out there, get the word out, so other skippers will look at me and go, oh, so-and-so's gone hybrid. It's working for him. Oh, maybe we should try that, and it would work for us. If it's working for him, it'll work for us. That's what he wanted to do. So that more of that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then it would start to spread throughout the fleet. I think we could see some uptake in changes.
I know that from a Scottish perspective, Wendy, over the years, back when I was coming through the industry, fishermen were very well aware of what, not necessarily a boat landing in the same port as them or fishing in the same area, but if he had something new and it was working, my goodness, it would soon get around.
Mm-hmm. However, that's great, and I would like that to be the case. But something that cropped up yesterday, I was in London at a common ground forum where lots of us within the industry came together, whether it be researchers, scientists, industry representatives. No fishermen were present, but they were invited. And they say that they like to have a share of their voice around the table, but these things happen. Maybe they're very busy. I know they're very busy. But the thing that cropped up yesterday was that fishermen have now become very competitive in where they're going, what they're catching, what they're landing. And that has probably distanced themselves from each other because they want to keep their own information private from that competitive perspective. And therefore they're not sharing information anymore and talking to each other like maybe they did years ago, like you're commenting on. And I think that's something that's happened that maybe isn't for the best.
Well, I'm sorry to steal your thunder there, Wendy, but I would have to say, as far as exactly what you said about them being not wanting people to know where they were fishing, what they were catching, all the rest of it, I would say that's historic.
Okay. So no change there then.
Absolutely not, I don't think. So that takes me to the point, if you had the reins, what's the first practical step you'd take to build that confidence?
I would be trying to get the fishing fleet to engage more together and to talk about the experiences or the technologies that they've got fitted and spread the word that it works. And that, to me, they could be doing this themselves if they just got together, not necessarily with scientists and researchers, but as a fleet together. I think that's the best way forward to get the word out, to get that knowledge out there of what technologies we do have. And we don't have the magic silver bullet, don't get me wrong, that's going to give you everything. But we have lots of different little technologies which accumulate together, and all of those emission reductions add up. And I think that's the way forward. And I think that's what we should be doing. But I don't think we're doing that because the knowledge is not there.
The interesting part when I listen to you, Wendy, is when you're going around talking to fishermen and doing the studies and going to the meetings and that, are you actually of the mind yourself, you fully believe yourself, this is the way they need to go, the industry needs to go?
I'm not fully, it would be wrong of me to say that they shouldn't, be doing something towards reducing their emissions, and they openly admit that they should be. They feel that the fishing fleet is so small on the grand scheme of things that it would make little difference towards net zero targets for the UK that they've committed to. Do I agree with that? I agree that they should be doing whatever they can do. And I feel we may have to get to a point where if they've done whatever they can do, we need to accept that they may not make it completely to a decarbonised fleet. But I feel that if they can do whatever is available at this moment in time, then that would be progress for me.
Okay. Let's talk about costs. You've spoken to skippers going without wages just to keep fuel and crew paid. In that world, how realistic is it to expect investment in new engines or energy-saving kit?
Yeah, I don't believe it's realistic, Jim, to ask them to fund it themselves. No, not at all. As I mentioned previously, they are already funding, self-funding, or in part, energy reducing emission technologies on board their vessels, albeit we've already said for a different reason, and they are prepared to do that. But if we're looking for the bigger picture, it will be very costly. Then maybe private investments needed, because we all know that the government doesn't have a bottomless pit of money to throw at this. Private investment could be the way forward, but then we've got a problem. What private companies are going to invest in a fishing fleet that is depleting year on year? So we've found ourselves in a bit of a tricky situation with the view to private investment, which could be the way forward, but it's highly unlikely.
Do you feel that with the joined-up thinking and talking more, an important part that could come into that is food security?
Absolutely. I think that's the overriding big issue here. We need to protect food security, and we need to protect our coastal communities that are reliant on the fishing sector. They go hand in hand together. I just think we need something. There's something missing that's not pulling all that together and seeing the importance of that. The fishing fleet alone, they don't feel that they're valued. Now, they've got very important jobs in terms of, like you say, food security. They don't feel that they're valued for what they do. They don't feel that they're listened to. They don't feel that they're seen, that their job is seen as being important. And that mindset has to change for us to make progress here.
It's how you change that, as well as you said there earlier about talking together. It's got to be trust come into it as well.
Yeah, we need to be pulling them all in together, not in different pockets, in different groups, in different parts of the country. We need something bigger to be going on here.
Do you feel government grasp that? Because we very often feel, is there political will?
I don't feel the government necessarily grasp the complexities that are being felt within the fleet. The fleet would argue that government don't listen to them, and they've been talking and saying things for years, and it falls on deaf ears. And it doesn't help that in government department the staff changeover is quite quick. So somebody comes into a position in a government agency, and within a very short time, they've moved on to another department. So then that you lose continuity, and what was said 6 months previously has now no longer there because that person's moved on. That doesn't help either, and that was identified yesterday at the workshop. There's this kind of, that structure is always changing, and the fishing fleet isn't, but the government agency structure is, and the turnover of staff just moving on into different roles, not leaving as such, but in different roles. And that work that's been previously done that might have been building up to something good and worthwhile is then set back and lost again because those people are just no longer there and the connection's lost, and then they start all over again and they don't feel as if they get anywhere. That's a bit of an issue that we've got.
We've got ambition, net zero targets, but a fleet saying the changes are unaffordable and unachievable. Are we setting goals the industry simply just can't meet?
Absolutely. That is potentially going to be the end result, Jim. Yes, I think if we push forward with a demand for the industry to decarbonise to meet net zero, at the current time, I say we're not likely to meet that at this moment in time. And we could end up failing to achieve. Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's never going to happen, but under the current climate and where we're sitting today, I don't see it being achievable anytime soon, and neither do members of the fishing fleet. There was some hope shown from them that they thought it probably would happen at some point in the future, but not anytime soon. And one of the common sayings was not in my lifetime. However, remember, I was dealing with an average age of a fleet of 56 years old. So I could understand it from that context. Maybe in the long term, not short to medium term, 5, 10 to 15 years. I think we're looking at in excess of 20. And we may just, with technologies developing all the time, we may have a solution. I wouldn't say it's never say never.
No, I think you're too positive. I think you're for the word never say never to come into it. Is there any realistic pathway for those small and older vessels without heavy government intervention?
I think it would be too expensive without government intervention. There's a pathway for the smaller vessels. I mean, we have electric batteries sitting on the shelf at Macduff shipyards up in northeast Scotland. I think the last time I spoke to somebody up there, I was kind of given a ballpark figure of about £45,000. That's probably not achievable by a small-scale fisher to find that sum of money. So without government intervention, I would say, no, it's not achievable, and there needs to be, yeah.
You know, I'm sure you know him well. Hans' uncle did a podcast with him not that long ago. I was talking to him recently, and his weekly expense is for that particular week when I was talking to him, you know, he's got the electric boat.
Mm-hmm.
His weekly expense was £2.
Yeah, but then what did it cost him to get to that stage?
Oh, well, yeah, that's right.
A colossal amount of money.
That's correct. No, I'm not just giving one side of the... Well, I am,
yeah.
But it's that must be an incentive on its own.
It is, yeah. I mean,
or part of.
Yeah, one of the key things that cropped up was that the costs involved would outweigh the benefits. That cropped up frequently. And again, we're talking about skippers towards the upper end of their career, towards the end of their career. So why would a skipper who wants to retire in the next 5 years, why would he want to invest heavily in any technology on his vessel when he's not going to be around to see the return of that? And this was highlighted to me frequently. We do not invest unless we can get a return. So that had to be considered as well. So that depends on the age of the skipper as well.
But I would have thought, yes, I can understand that, Wendy, but that skipper, although he's thinking that to himself, if he is a son or other family on board, well, he'll be thinking of their future as well.
Most of these were single-handed skippers.
Right, okay.
Their family members were not coming into the industry. Yeah. This was another thing that was highlighted. The younger generation are not coming into the industry. They're not following their fathers in their footsteps. The fathers who are the fishermen or the skippers are not encouraging their children to follow them through either anymore. Yeah. They're telling them it's not what it used to be. Don't come into the industry. Go and do something else. So we've also got that problem of we've got the aging fleet of skippers with not many younger generation coming through.
My goodness, this makes this a far bigger story, Wendy, when you think of that, because the future of the industry is at stake here.
Yep. In Northern Ireland, one fisherman said to me, we would be lucky if we had an industry here in 5 years' time.
5?
Yeah. We would be lucky if we had an industry here in 5 years' time, because all of our skippers are aging and will be retired in the next 5 years, and we have very little coming through the ranks to fill the gaps. And that was also mentioned in the southwest of England. So it wasn't just in Northern Ireland. They also said we don't have youngers coming through. I did pick up how many young skippers did I have? There was a 27-year-old, a 31, a 33 and a 37-year-old in the study. That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Uh-huh.
One was in Northern Ireland, 2 were in Scotland, and the other in the northeast of England.
But even in Scotland, the average age of the fishermen in this country, or Scotland anyway. I think it's Scotland. Maybe you'll say it's UK, but I'm sure it's Scotland. The average age is well in the 50s.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me at all. That would have made up the majority of my study, the participants. Absolutely. So that is a concern moving forward.
That's a big
as
concern.
Well.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah. You would like to feel. I know it's not. We can't pass ownership on, but you'd like to think that would become a concern for the political powers.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, parts of the fleet believe that the UK government don't want a UK fishing fleet. That they want to hand it over to the EU to do the fishing. So there was a feeling of that as well within the fleet.
The way they're acting just now, they're certain. You can understand why people are thinking that. They couldn't make a better job of it just now if they tried to do that.
Yes, and yesterday when I was in London at this Common Ground Forum workshop, it just highlighted to me how bad the problems are within the fleet. That was concentrating on the English fleet, not the Scottish, Welsh or Northern Ireland. That was purely the English fleet yesterday. And before yesterday, I thought the fleet was in a better position than what it was. And I've come away from that yesterday thinking, wow, there are so many issues and challenges and problems that need to be addressed.
Yes.
And it actually made me realise that my topic on decarbonising a fleet for net zero would not have been on the agenda if I hadn't been there. There are just I agree with the fleet. There are many things going on that need to be addressed long before this particular topic.
From all the conversations you've had, what technologies feel even remotely viable over the next, maybe say 5 to 10 years?
I think we do have some technologies, which I think are good. Well, a lot of vessels have a boat meter. Now that sounds quite simple, but it's still, if they're using the boat meter properly, it's quite cheap to fit. It will reduce emissions. It will reduce fuel costs. So that's the one that the majority of vessels did have. Others have been a bit more elaborate. They've kind of looked at things like the fiberglass hull with no paint, so it glides through the water easier and less emissions. Then there's things like the Eco Pro, which is starting to gain some traction. It's been slow. That's like a hydrogen electrolyzer, which is from a company down in Paynton in Devon called Eco Motors.
Yeah.
That was slow, but I think that's good to be using, and they were getting fast funding for that as well. I'm speaking to a company tomorrow that are using or have created a new non-biocide anti-foul coating paint on propellers, and that reduces emissions by about 4%. So if you had the Eco Pro and that gives you 8 to 10%, your fuel meter gives you a small percentage, and you have this paint which gives you another 4%. You can accumulate, and if you're using all of these small reducing emission technologies, you can be saving upwards of 20%, which is quite good.
It's very good.
Whilst we wait for new technology, new ideas to emerge over the next 5 years, 10 years, and year on year, I think we're going to get better and get new technologies. So I think we could be making more use of all of those little bits that we've got that are not £45,000 like a battery, or they're affordable and fast funded, so there could be grant systems for it. I think if we were doing that, we could see a big difference. But those technologies will continue to develop over the next 5 years or more. And even things like tomorrow, when I went recently to Lithuania to the ICES conference and I presented my work, it gained the attention of the Netherlands Marine Institute, and they realised that what I'd done here in the UK, they needed to do there. They needed to talk to their fishing fleet and find out what they felt, what their perceptions were towards. They were in no different a position than what we were. So this has kind of moved on a little bit, and I'm now speaking tomorrow with the Netherlands Fishing Innovation Group, equivalent to our group here, to collaborate and to discuss what are they doing, what have they got technology-wise, what are they using, could we be using something that they're doing, and likewise, have we got something that they don't know about, so we can work together across nations and learn about the different technologies that each nation are actually developing. I think it's a good way forward
Definitely.
for everyone.
Definitely, that sounds very encouraging. One thing I would mention, the EcoPro that you talked about. I've done a podcast with Adrian Bartlett from Ecomodus earlier, how things are the problem you find in England and it's better in Scotland. Well, they found that they got fast funding in England, but Marine Fund Scotland was dragging their heels.
Yes, I was at a meeting in York probably about 18 months ago, and Adrian was present, and the parts of the Scottish fleet were there from Peterhead and Fraserburgh and Macduff and Banff, and we had the English fleet as well. And the Scottish guys were a little bit upset because the English fishermen were complaining that they only got 80% funding.
Oh.
And the Scottish guys chipped in, well, you've got 80%, we've got nothing. We haven't got any money.
Yeah.
But you're complaining that you've only got 80%. So there was a little bit of that going on. But yeah, you're right. I think the Scottish fleet were not getting the funding for it. I remember hearing that.
Yeah, which is disappointing.
Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of fishermen up around Fraserburgh, and they were self-funding the Eco Pro because of obviously the cost is bespoke to the vessel, so there's not a one price for every vessel. And some of the fishermen were prepared to pay that money out and fund it themselves.
Well, that sounds encouraging that they see a future.
Absolutely, and I think the uptake is now starting to grow with that Eco Pro.
Oh, that's good.
Word's getting out. I mean, there was a couple of mixed reviews, different reasons. Guarantees on engines might have been affected by one vessel in Scotland, but generally speaking, the signs were positive towards that technology. So I'm hoping that this other technology, we can also start to get that rolled out as well.
Is there a trust issue with new technologies in the fleet, Wendy?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. I think anything new, there's a trust issue. Fishermen are great at, if it ain't break, don't fix it. I know what I've got. I'm happy with what I've got. It works. It gets me out to sea. It brings me home. I'm not changing it for nothing. They do that. They feel like that. So I think some have got a mindset that they're willing to make the changes and happy, and some are just quite happy and content to leave me alone with what I've got. I trust what I've got. If it breaks down tomorrow, I can get a part off the shelf. I can fix it myself. New technology brings lack of trust with can I get the part? Who's going to fix it? Time out of the water is money. And I think you get that with any new technology. I think you get that with electric cars, So at the minute, there would be. I think that's quite natural for there to be trust issues.
You singled out Northern Ireland as especially resistant. Is that cultural, economic, or just the age and condition of the boats?
Probably a combination of all of those, Jim. Yeah, all of them. Age and condition of the boats jumps out first, springs to mind. The resistance, there was resistance just generally towards, government telling us what to do. Northern Ireland they were very actually involved in this study. Participants from Northern Ireland represented the most in the study. They were very, very good at talking to me and willing to talk to me. They didn't agree with it, 100% did not agree with it. And they were very resistant, but they were very willingly taking part. So yeah, maybe a little bit of political resistance, government resistance. They openly stated that if decarbonisation was forced upon the fleet, that they absolutely 100% would not do it. They would refuse to do it. And I'm speaking for a small part of the fleet, not all parts of the fleet, because I didn't speak to everyone. But the element that I did speak with said that it would not happen in Northern Ireland, and then they would refuse point blank to do it. So there was very strong resistance. Northern Ireland wasn't the only place that I felt resistance, Jim. In the southwest of England, when I got to Mevagissey, I also was met with quite a bit of resistance there as well. But there is good reason for that. The David Attenborough film had come out in the days beforehand, which was about trawling and wasn't putting the industry in a good light. And also the 12-year deal for the EU fishing vessels to fish in UK waters came out the day before. So that caused a lot of upset. And then therefore there was quite a bit of resistance towards my study as I arrived there. Another day, at another time, I probably would have been met with a different attitude and a different approach, but that's the way it happened.
Yeah, that's bad timing, unfortunately.
It was. Yeah, it was a symptom of bad timing, that.
Could have been anywhere on that day. There was an enormous backlash from
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I agree. It could have been anywhere.
Yeah.
It was just at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Does Northern Ireland show us that what happens when the fleet gets too old to modernise?
Yes, it does. The fishing fleet in general has had decades of underfunding, no investment, and the Northern Ireland is probably the part of the fleet that's probably suffered the most, and because of that, it would be the most difficult and challenging to address and to put right. I'm not saying that Northern Ireland's the only part with ageing vessels, because other parts of the fleet also have it, but it was most apparent in Northern Ireland. And that is purely down to that lack of funding and investment over a very long period of time. And now, to put that right is going to cost a very sizable sum of money.
I can remember myself, Wendy, when fishermen were planning on building and renewing their boats. They knew they had a market for their second-hand boat in both Northern and Southern Ireland. I can remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was something that actually was mentioned, that if decarbonisation was forced upon the fleet, some will say it needs to be forced, because if you don't force it, the fishing fleet won't do it. Others will say forcing is the wrong way and to do it voluntary. So there's a split in terms of should it be voluntary or should it be mandatory. But many would say if it was forced upon the fleet, you would just see boats for sale everywhere and skippers would give up, especially since they're towards the upper end of their retirement years. If they've only got a few years left, it could happen. And you could just have boats for sale everywhere.
Yeah, frightening, the thought.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a fishing background myself, I just hope that never happens.
No, I hope not either.
Yeah. On a human side, you gathered a lot of human stories, people struggling, taking no wages. How much does that day-to-day pressure hold back long-term planning like net zero?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's holding back any progress now. And as they have those day-to-day pressures that are constant, and that was highlighted to me yesterday of how many there are, I think it will always hold back this particular issue and hold back the sector in decarbonising. Yeah. Before yesterday, I might have had a slightly different opinion, but after being brought up to speed yesterday with the many issues that are still need to be addressed in the English fleet, I would say that, decarbonising would be pushed further and further down the chain. And the fleet, it's going to be a very big challenge and a barrier and hold them back.
Looking ahead, you did find some appetite in the background for change. What would it actually take to bring that willingness to the surface?
Yes, Jim, I did. I'm not going to say that this was a totally negative experience, this study, because it wasn't. There was a lot of good positive outcomes, and there was positivity around different things. I would say to bring it to the forefront and to gain some traction is that there needs to be a deeper engagement within the fishing fleet, talking about it. The amount of times a skipper said to me, "Oh, I won't talk about that. That's gone straight over my head. I don't know what you mean. We don't talk about anything like that." Others, particularly companies, would say, "Yeah, we're talking about it all the time," but they're in a different position. They need to be, they've got the money and they need to be doing these things for supplying their produce. I think there needs to be a deeper understanding and engagement within the sector themselves. And I think there needs to be a deeper and a more widespread understanding between government agencies and the fishing fleet. My study being replicated at a larger scale to get a much wider viewpoint could be useful, because it also, at the same time, it's getting the word out there by doing these studies. I'm talking about it with them, and they're talking about it with me. Whereas if we don't do these studies and this research, nobody's talking about it at all. So I think that we need to keep talking. We need to try and push the benefits to the fishing fleet, that it's not just about reducing fuel costs. They're also benefiting towards the climate change agenda and the targets, and get them to break down that barrier. If you use the word net zero, it's like a no. But little do they know, they're already contributing towards that. And if they realise that, they might think, well, actually, I'm actually doing that already and I'm doing some good, instead of having this negative outlook. So I think talking is the biggest thing, together and between the fleet and the government agencies, especially before any decisions are made moving forward. That's imperative.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's quite powerful as well. I think that's fantastic, Wendy. And I think I do feel from listening to you today, the point I made about with the government coming in and agencies talking, food security needs to be included as part of it, not just an add-on, part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Bluntly, do you think we're still in the wishful thinking stage, or do you see a realistic way forward?
I think right now we are still in that realistic stage, yes. However, like I've said before, with time, new technologies emerging, consideration for alternative green fuels, which I think is a real high up there for me on the agenda. I think at some point in the future, we could have some very good options and we could have some success. Whether we are successful 100% is another matter. But I think as it stands, if we all pull together and used what we had available and keep working together, we could achieve something very good here in the years to come.
Encouraging words. Wendy, where can our listeners follow you online?
I can be found online on LinkedIn and also at the University of Hull. My email address is quite long, w.e.chadwick 2022 at hull.ac.uk. But LinkedIn would be a very good starting point. I can be found on there.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, I think it's a good time to hold up, and I would certainly like to thank you and just maybe ask you, keep on doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ian.